At 3:17 in the morning, inside a dark, quiet house, something irreversible had already happened. No one called for help. No one ran outside. No one screamed. There was only stillness. A young woman who had been alive hours earlier was now motionless, hidden behind walls that had no idea what they were holding. Her phone had gone silent. Her voice had disappeared. And somewhere nearby, two people were making a decision that would stretch this moment into 7 years of unanswered questions. Not 7 days, not 7 months, 7 years. For now, no one knew her name. No one knew where she was. No one even knew she was gone. All the world knew was that, suddenly, she stopped responding. Messages went unread. Calls went straight to nothing. Social media froze in time. One moment she existed. The next, she vanished. And the silence began. Weeks later, investigators would learn that her final confirmed movements, her last digital footprint, her final location pings, all pointed back to this place. Back to this night. Back to the people who had been with her when everything changed, according to case records and reporting. Story 19. But in this moment, none of that mattered yet. Because right now, somewhere far away, her mother was still sleeping. Her best friend was still checking her phone. Her family still believed she was just busy, still trying to survive, still trying to build a life. They had no idea that the last chapter had already begun. Hours earlier, she had been laughing, working, performing, trying to earn money in a city that had never promised her anything. She had walked out of club that night, believing she still had choices, believing she still had time, believing tomorrow would come. Instead, tomorrow would become a mystery. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the trail was already cooling. No weaknesses, no obvious crime scene, no clear timeline, just absence. And absence is the hardest thing to investigate, because absence doesn't bleed. It doesn't shout. It doesn't leave fingerprints. It just spreads. Her phone stopped transmitting. Not shattered, not recovered, not found in a ditch. It just stopped, as if someone had pressed a permanent mute button on her life. Investigators would later discover that her last digital signals came from a quiet area near a river park. An ordinary place. A place where families picnic, where kids play, where nothing violent seems possible. Which raised the first disturbing question. Why there? Why in the middle of nowhere? Why so far from where she had been working? Why in a company of people who claimed they had already dropped her off? And why did their story never quite fit? At first, authorities weren't alarmed. Young adults disappear all the time. They move. They run. They change their minds. Especially when they're broke. Especially when they're scared. Especially when they're trying to start over. She checked all those boxes. 19. No money. No stable housing. No family nearby. From the outside, her disappearance looked like independence. From the inside, it felt like panic. But then the days stacked up. No posts. No texts. No late-night calls. Her best friend tried again. Nothing. Her mother tried again. Nothing. And then it happened. That quiet moment every missing person's family recognizes. The moment when hope turns into dread. When she's just busy becomes something is wrong. Her mother replayed their last conversation in her head. Every word, every pause, every tone. Had she sounded scared? Had she sounded unsure? Had she asked for help without saying it? There was no way to know, because now there was only silence. Soon, flyers appeared. Her face stared out from paper, smiling, young, hopeful, a face that still believed in tomorrow. Social media groups formed. Thousands of strangers began searching, sharing, speculating, guessing. Some claimed sightings. Some invented stories. Some wanted attention. Every rumor forced investigators to chase ghosts. Every false lead wasted time. And time was the one thing she no longer had. Then came the first official story. The last people who admitted seeing her alive said this. They had left the club together. They had driven a long distance. They had dropped her at a gas station. She had gotten into a car with a stranger. And that was it. End of story. Nothing else. No explanation for the detour. No reason for the distance. No proof of the stranger. Just trust us. And for years, that story stood. But even in the beginning, something felt wrong. Why would someone with no money be dropped 70 miles away? Why would she willingly enter a stranger's car in the middle of the night? Why would her phone later ping near one of their homes? Why did every detail seem slightly misaligned? Like puzzle pieces that almost fit but never quite locked. Investigators kept digging. Phones, accounts, messages, metadata. They were looking for something solid. Anything. Instead, they found gaps. Dead zones. Deleted data. Unanswered questions. It was as if her life had been carefully erased one fragment at a time. Her mother moved into a cheap motel near the search area. Day after day, she handed out flyers. She begged strangers for help. She learned how to speak to cameras, how to hide fear, how to survive uncertainty. She said she wasn't ready to say goodbye, because goodbye meant accepting something she wasn't prepared to believe, that her daughter was never coming home. Years passed. 1 year, 2, 3, then 7. 7 birthdays without answers. 7 holidays without her voice. 7 years of waiting for a phone call that never came. And still, officially, she was only missing. Not dead, not alive, just suspended in between. Then, quietly, everything shifted. A forgotten social media video resurfaced, posted one day later than everyone believed she had vanished. A short clip, a park, a background figure, someone walking behind her, someone unidentified, someone who should not have been there. Suddenly, the timeline collapsed. The story cracked, and the people who had once been peripheral were now at the center. Investigators returned to a house that had long been sold, a place that had changed owners, a place that had been lived in by families who had no idea what lay beneath. They brought dogs, forensics teams, ground-penetrating equipment. They searched every inch, every wall, every patch of soil, every corner. And then they found something. Something that ended hope. Something that confirmed fear. Something that turned a missing person case into a homicide investigation. Bones. Human remains. Hidden. Burned. Fragmented. 7 years too late. The silence was finally explained. But not forgiven. And not resolved. Because finding remains does not answer the most important question. What happened in that house? Who decided she would not leave alive? Who watched her die? Who helped hide her? Who lived with that secret for years? Who smiled in public while knowing the truth? And most importantly, how many signs were missed along the way? Because this story was never just about disappearance. It was about trust, about vulnerability, about what happens when someone desperate for a fresh start crosses paths with people hiding something far darker. And the first crack in that darkness was silence. In the next act, we will pull back and ask the question no one wanted to face at the time. How did a 19-year-old girl, armed with nothing but hope and $20, end up walking straight into a nightmare she never saw coming? And why do the people closest to her that night never tell the same story twice? Before there was suspicion, before there were search warrants, before there were arrests, there was a decision, a quiet, impulsive, life-altering decision made by a 19-year-old who believed that staying still was more dangerous than leaving everything behind. She had grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, where dreams were predictable, where futures were inherited, where ambition felt like rebellion. And she wanted out, not because she hated home, because she was afraid of becoming invisible inside it. According to early reports and family accounts, she talked often about starting over, about building something of her own, about proving she could survive without anyone's help. Story 19. She wasn't running from something. She was running toward possibility. At least, that's what she believed. She didn't leave with a plan. She left with a suitcase, a few bags, and $20 borrowed from a friend. No job, no apartment, no safety net, Just confidence. The kind that only exists before life teaches restraint. Her mother gave her a penny for protection, a small ritual, a symbolic shield. She put in her pocket. Neither of them knew how fragile hope can be when it's carried alone. She had answered an online ad. Housekeeping, roommate, temporary stability. A stranger offering space in exchange for cleaning. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. In her mind, it was a foothold, a first step. She flew more than 1,000 miles away, believing that first steps always lead somewhere better. They didn't. Within a day, she was gone. Her belongings were placed outside. No detalle de explicación. No long conversation. No second chance. Just leave. Now she was stranded in a city where she knew no one. With no money. No home. No backup plan. Most people would have gone back. She didn't, because going back felt like failure. And failure terrified her more than homelessness. She checked into a cheap motel, paid by waiting for tax refund. Survival mode activated. Every decision from that moment forward was about staying afloat, applying for jobs, walking miles, hoping paperwork wouldn't be required, hoping someone would give her a chance. Most didn't. She lacked documents, references, stability. So doors closed quietly, one after another. Eventually, she found work where desperation often leads. A strip club, not because it was her dream, because it paid, because it was immediate, because it didn't ask many questions. The top of Gainesville Club became her temporary lifeline, a place where she could earn cash, where no one cared where she slept, where everyone pretended not to notice how lost everyone else was. People who worked there later described her as friendly, talkative, hopeful, still optimistic. She wasn't hardened yet. She still believed this was temporary, just until she found something better, just until things stabilized, just until life improved. But instability changes people. It compresses time. It makes tomorrow feel distant. It makes risky choices feel reasonable. It makes strangers feel safer than loneliness. And in that environment, trust becomes cheap. That's where she met them. Another dancer and her boyfriend. They weren't authorities. They weren't protectors. They weren't saviors. They were just familiar faces in a chaotic place. People she saw regularly. People who knew her name. People who knew she was struggling. And in moments of vulnerability, familiarity feels like safety. They talked, shared rides, shared stories, shared frustrations. They knew she was broke. They knew she was bouncing between places. They knew she didn't have family nearby. They knew she was alone. That knowledge matters. Because predators don't always hunt. Sometimes they just wait. On February 25th, she finished her shift. Another long night. Another stack of small bills. Another reminder that survival was harder than she expected. She didn't go back to her motel. She left with them. A casual decision. The kind no one remembers making. The kind that feels insignificant until it becomes permanent. Later, they would say they drove her far away. 77 miles. For no clear reason. Through multiple counties. Past countless exits. Past dozens of places she could have been dropped off safely. They claimed they left her at a gas station. Said she got into a stranger's car. Said they watched her leave. And then they went home. That was their story. For years, investigators accepted it at first. Because it fit a narrative. A young woman. No money. Risky lifestyle. Trusting strangers. It sounded believable. Too believable. It placed responsibility everywhere except where it was inconvenient. But something didn't sit right. Why would she agree to be taken that far? Why not closer? Why not safer? Why not familiar? Why would two people drive nearly 80 miles just to drop off someone they barely knew? Why waste gas? Why waste time? Why waste effort? None of it added up. Then the phone data surfaced. Her last pings. Not near the gas station. Not near any highway. But near Porterdale. 3 miles from one of their homes. Near a river park. Near a residential area. Near somewhere she had no known reason to be. And suddenly, the story fractured. Later, investigators found a video she posted the next day. A short clip, walking in a park, alive, after she was supposedly gone. A man visible behind her, unidentified, unexplained, unaccounted for, which raised a devastating question. If she was alive on February 26th, then where was she on the night of the 25th? And with whom? The timeline collapsed, and in its place emerged a darker possibility. That she hadn't been dropped off, that she hadn't met a stranger, that she hadn't disappeared randomly, that she had gone exactly where they took her, and never left. For 7 years, no one challenged that narrative. Not aggressively, not publicly, not legally, because there wasn't enough proof, because memories faded, because technology evolved, because cases age, and old lies grow comfortable. Her mother never believed the story. Not fully. Motters harelidu. She felt something was wrong, felt something had been hidden, felt something had been decided without her daughter's consent. But feelings aren't evidence, and evidence was scarce. So the question lingered. For years. Unanswered. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. What really happened after she left that club? Who decided where she would go? Who controlled the next few hours of her life? Who benefited from her silence? And who had been rehearsing their version of events since the very beginning? Because in true crime, the first story is rarely the truth. It's the draft, the placeholder, the version that buys time. And time is exactly what they needed. In the next act, we go back further. Before the club, before the drive, before the disappearance, to the choices that shaped her vulnerability, and to the environment that quietly placed her in harm's way long before she ever realized it. Because no tragedy begins at the moment of impact. It begins with a series of small decisions, each one harmless, until they aren't. And hers were already stacking up, long before she ever stepped into that club, long before she ever trusted the wrong people, long before anyone would search for her name online. Her story was already being shaped, not by villains, not by violence, not by danger, by environment, by expectations, by quiet pressure, by the invisible weight of growing up in a place where dreams felt larger than the roads that led away from it. She was raised in a town where life followed predictable patterns. Graduate, find work, stay close, build small. There was comfort in that structure, but for someone like her, it felt like a cage. She was energetic, outspoken, restless. She didn't want to inherit a future. She wanted to invent one. Friends later said she talked constantly about leaving, about seeing more, about doing more, about becoming more, not in a dramatic way, in a determined way, like someone who had already decided she wouldn't stay. Her social media reflected it. Quotes about living boldly, about taking risks, about not wasting time. One tattoo read, "Whatever you love can be taken away, so live like it's your dying day." At 19, that sounded poetic. Later, it sounded prophetic. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She was hopeful. And hope can be dangerous when it's unsupported. Because hope convinces you that preparation isn't necessary, that things will work out, that you'll figure out on the way. At home, she was loved, protected, watched over. Her mother worried about her independence, not because she doubted her, because she knew the world wasn't kind to young women alone. But she also knew something else. You can't cage someone who's already mentally gone. So she let her go, with a penny, with prayers, with fear she kept hidden. Leaving wasn't an escape. It was a statement. I can do this myself. That belief shaped everything that followed. It made her resistant to asking for help. It made her push through hardship. It made her normalize struggle and normalize danger. When a Craigslist arrangement collapsed, it was her first warning. A reminder that strangers don't owe you anything. That verbal agreements mean nothing without leverage. That safety is fragile. But instead of retreating, she doubled down. Because going back would mean admitting she wasn't ready. And she wasn't ready to admit that. Living in motels changes you. It teaches you how temporary everything is. how nothing belongs to you, how every door could close tomorrow. It keeps you alert and exhausted and desperate. She was waiting on money, a tax return, a digital lifeline. Until it came, she had to survive. And survival rarely looks noble. It looks messy, compromised, improvised. The strip club wasn't a moral failure. It was an economic decision, a rational choice in an irrational situation. It offered immediate income, flexible hours, no paperwork. In exchange, it demanded emotional labor, vulnerability, visibility, and sometimes access. Working there exposed her to people living on edges, people hiding from pasts, people escaping debts, people reinventing themselves. Some are kind, some are dangerous, most were complicated. It was an ecosystem built on performance. Everyone pretending to be okay, everyone pretending to be confident, everyone pretending to be in control. She adapted, learned the routines, learned the rhythms, learned who to talk to, learned who to avoid. But adaptation isn't the same as protection. It just means you last longer. She still talked about real jobs, about waitressing again, about getting paperwork sorted, about stability. The club wasn't her destination. It was her bridge. At least, that's how she saw it. But bridges are dangerous places. You're not settled. You're not safe. You're just crossing. And when you're crossing, you're exposed from every angle. Her friendships in Atlanta were situational, based on proximity, based on convenience, based on shared struggle, not on history, not on deep trust, not on long-term loyalty, which meant she didn't really know who she was surrounded by. She knew their routines, not their boundaries. She knew their jokes, not their morals. She knew their surface, not their depths. Jonathan and Caitlin existed inside this environment. They weren't introduced as threats. They were introduced as co-workers and partners. A dancer and her boyfriend. A familiar pair. A constant presence. They were part of the background of her new life, which made them feel safe. People underestimate how powerful familiarity is. It disarms instinct. It quiets doubt. It makes you overlook inconsistencies. You stop evaluating. You start assuming. They knew her story. They knew she had left home. They knew she was broke. They knew she was alone. They knew she was waiting on money. They knew she didn't have options. That information matters, because vulnerability isn't just emotional. It's logistical. When you have nowhere else to go, every offer feels generous. Every ride feels helpful. Every invitation feels necessary. She wasn't reckless that night. She didn't jump into a stranger's car. She left with people she recognized, people she believed understood her situation, people she thought wouldn't hurt her. That's what makes this story unbearable. She didn't walk into danger blindly. She walked into it trusting. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, something else was forming. In private, in thoughts, in fantasies, in obsessions. Something investigators wouldn't learn about until years later. Something hidden behind normal routines. Something that didn't announce itself. Something that blended in. Later, prosecutors would point to disturbing interests, fascinations, online content, dark themes, morbid curiosity. But at the time, no one saw it. Because most darkness doesn't advertise. It disguises itself as normal. And so, by the time February 25th arrived, she was tired, underpaid, unstable, isolated, still hopeful, still believing things were about to improve, still convinced she was one break away from success, which made her willing to say yes, to rides, to favors, to plans she didn't fully understand. Every tragedy has a foundation, not made of evil, made of pressure, of optimism without backup, of independence without insulation, of dreams without safeguards. And hers had been forming quietly for months. In the next act, that fragile foundation will start to crack, because as her world grew more uncertain, someone else's world was growing more dangerous, and confidence was turning into something far more unstable, something that no longer needed permission, something that would soon demand control. Power does not always look like wealth. Sometimes it looks like control. Sometimes it looks like knowing someone needs you. Sometimes it looks like being the person who decides where someone sleeps, how they get home, and who they rely on when everything feels unstable. And slowly, quietly, that kind of power began to form around her. By the winter of 2016, her life in Georgia had settled into a fragile routine. Work at the club, short bursts of cash, long stretches of uncertainty, temporary rooms, temporary plans, temporary stability. She was surviving. Barely. But survival creates momentum. Once you've endured enough chaos, you begin to believe you're resilient, that nothing can really break you, that you've seen enough. And that belief is dangerous because it lowers your guard. At the club, she became more comfortable, more confident, more relaxed, more open. She learned which customers tipped, which coworkers were safe, which managers could be trusted. She built a small network, not a safety net, a network, something that functioned until it didn't. Jonathan and Caitlin were part of that network. They were consistent, always together, always around, always familiar. They offer rides, shared food, talked about plans. They didn't present as threatening. They presented as stable. Compared to her life, they looked settled. They had a place. They had each other. They had routines. That mattered because instability gravitates towards stability, even if that stability is an illusion. Over time, reliance grows subtly. It doesn't announce itself. It starts with small things. Do you need a ride? Do you want to crash for a bit? Let's hang out after work. Each yes becomes a thread, and eventually, those threads form a net. Not when you see, when you feel. She didn't think she was becoming dependent. She thought she was building friendships. She thought she was integrating. She thought she was finally finding her place. Meanwhile, in Jonathan's world, something else was happening. Outwardly, he looked ordinary. A young man, a boyfriend, a regular at the club. Nothing about him screamed danger. No criminal reputation. No obvious violence. No public warning signs. But danger rarely introduces itself. It embeds. It blends. It waits. Later, investigators would describe disturbing patterns, fascinations with death, macabre interests, dark online content, obsession with control. But at the time, none of that was visible, because most people with violent fantasies do not look violent. They look normal. That's how they survive. Caitlin, too, presented as ordinary. A dancer, a partner, a co-worker. She joked. She worked. She socialized. No one saw her as capable of harm. No one suspected anything. Why would they? Evil does not wear uniforms. Inside their relationship, however, power dynamics were shifting. Jonathan dominated. Caitlin followed, then resisted, then complied. A cycle. Observers later noted instability, arguments, dependence, isolation. But again, nothing that screamed crime. Just dysfunction, which is everywhere. When they interacted with her, they weren't predators on display. They were helpers, offering rides, offering company, offering inclusion, positioning themselves as necessary. She didn't see it as being controlled. She saw it as being supported. There's a difference, until there isn't. As weeks passed, her tax refund hadn't come. Jobs hadn't materialized. Stability hadn't arrived. Her optimism was being tested. And when optimism weakens, people cling to whatever feels solid. And right now, they felt solid. She confided in them. About money. About stress. About missing home. About feeling lost. Each confession increased intimacy. Each vulnerability increased leverage. Not because she intended it, because that's how human relationships work. They learned her fears, her hopes, her limits, her boundaries, and possibly how flexible those boundaries were. At the same time, Jonathan's confidence was growing. not socially, psychologically. The confidence that comes from secrecy, from believing no one sees your real self, from believing you're smarter than everyone else, from believing you can control outcomes. That kind of confidence becomes arrogance, and arrogance breeds risk. Small lies become easier. Stories get rehearsed. Scenarios get imagined. Boundaries get tested in private, not necessarily physically, mentally, emotionally. Caitlin's online behavior would later become relevant. Posts, videos, dark humor, morbid interests. At the time, it was dismissed as edgy, as personality, as harmless fascination. But fascination is never harmless when it's nurtured. Inside that dynamic, something unhealthy was growing. Not yet violent, not yet criminal, but unstable, volatile, like pressure inside a sealed container. And she was unknowingly stepping closer to it. Not because she was reckless, because she was tired, because she needed rides, because she wanted friends, because she didn't want to feel alone. February approached. The nights grew colder. Her situation hadn't improved. Her resources were shrinking. Her options were narrowing, and she was more entangled than she realized. On the surface, nothing dramatic was happening. No fights, no threats, no warnings, just proximity, just familiarity, just routine, which is often how danger enters. Not with chaos, with comfort. By late February, she trusted them. Not blindly, but enough. Enough to leave with them. Enough to go somewhere unfamiliar. Enough to surrender control of her transportation. Enough to assume they had her best interests in mind. And they knew that. They knew she trusted them. They knew she needed them. They knew she didn't have backups. Which meant they had power. Power to decide where she went. Power to decide when she returned. Power to decide who knew where she was. Power to decide what story would be told if she disappeared. And that is when assent becomes dangerous. When someone realizes they can shape reality. Not just their own, someone else's. By the night of February 25th, the pieces were in place. Isolation, dependence, familiarity, secrecy, unstable psychology, unchecked confidence. Nothing explosive, just combustible. Waiting. She walked out of that club believing she was safe, believing she was with people who knew her, believing tomorrow was still hers, believing this was just another ride. It wasn't. In the next act, pressure will begin to crack this fragile structure. External attention, internal tension, financial stress, psychological strain. And when pressure meets arrogance, something breaks. And when it breaks, it never breaks quietly. Pressure does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates. It builds quietly in the background, disguised as inconvenience, stress, irritation, and exhaustion. And by the time people realize they are drowning in it, they are already too deep to escape. By late February 2016, every person in this story was under pressure, but each of them was responding to it differently. And those differences mattered. For her, pressure meant survival. Money was running out. Housing was unstable. Work was unpredictable. Every day was a calculation. How much can I earn tonight? Where can I sleep tomorrow? Who can I rely on this week? That kind of mental math never stops. It follows you into sleep. It wakes you up early. It steals your patience. And it erodes judgment. Not because you're careless, because you're tired. She was still waiting on that tax refund, still believing relief was coming, still telling herself this was temporary. But temporary had started to feel permanent, and permanent fear changes behavior. It makes people accept things they normally wouldn't. It makes them overlook discomfort. It makes them ignore intuition. Meanwhile, Jonathan was feeling a different kind of pressure. Not financial, psychological. The pressure of maintaining an image. The pressure of hiding parts of himself. The pressure of keeping control over his relationship. The pressure of sustaining a version of reality that only existed in his head. That kind of pressure creates paranoia. You start imagining threats that aren't there. You start assuming people are watching, judging, suspecting. Every secret feels heavier when you're stressed. Every lie feels closer to exposure. Every normal interaction feels like potential danger. Caitlin was under pressure too, caught between loyalty and doubt, between dependence and discomfort, between attraction and fear. Relationships built on imbalance always generate pressure. Someone is always afraid of losing control. Someone is always afraid of losing approval. And that fear drives choices. Inside their relationship, tension had been increasing. Arguments, mood shifts, unspoken resentments. Not unusual, but dangerous when combined with unstable personalities. They were living in an emotional pressure cooker, and she walked into it without realizing. On February 25th, she finished her shift like any other. Tired, probably sore, probably thinking about money, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about how to make things better. She wasn't thinking about danger, because danger rarely feels dramatic beforehand. It feels ordinary. She left with them, not dramatically, not hesitantly, casually, like she had done before. What happened next remains partly hidden, because the only people who know the full truth are the ones who lied about it. According to their early statements, they drove a long distance. Why? No clear answer. No consistent explanation. Just vague references. Going somewhere. Dropping her off. Helping her out. But long drives create privacy. Isolation. Time. Opportunity. Investigators later questioned why they bypassed dozens of safer options. Why not drop her near her motel? Why not closer to work? Why not somewhere populated? Why take her into quiet territory? They never gave convincing answers. Her phone data showed movement inconsistent with their story, locations that didn't match, timings that didn't fit, patterns that suggested something else, which meant someone was lying. And lying under pressure is revealing, because people under stress make mistakes. After that night, her phone stopped responding. No calls, no messages, no logins, total silence, which immediately raised red flags. Young people do not vanish digitally by accident. Not in 2016. Not without reason. When questioned later, Jonathan and Caitlin stuck to their story. Repeated it, refined it, defended it. But repetition does not equal truth. It equals practice. Pressure also mounted externally. Her friends noticed. Her family noticed. Social media noticed. Missing posts turned into missing person reports, which turned into news segments, which turned into public attention. And public attention terrifies people with secrets. Suddenly, this wasn't private. This wasn't contained. This wasn't manageable. Strangers were asking questions. Journalists were digging. Detectives were analyzing data. Every lie was at risk of exposure. Jonathan moved, left the area, started over, tried to disappear into normalcy. A common reaction. Distance feels like safety. New cities feel like clean slates. But data travels. Memories persist. And guilt follows. Caitlin stayed closer, maintained appearances, lived her life, kept working. Outwardly, everything looked fine, which in retrospect is chilling, because somewhere beneath that normality was knowledge of what had happened. Investigators struggled. No body, no crime scene, no witnesses, just suspicion. And suspicion is not enough. Cases like this often die quietly, not because no one cares, because there isn't enough to act. Her mother refused to let that happen. She relocated, advocated, organized, spoke to media. She turned grief into labor. Every day, for years, that pressure never left her. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Caitlin were under invisible pressure. Every knock, every call, every message. Could this be it? Have they figured it out? Is today the day? Living like that changes people. It makes them rigid, defensive, overconfident, or reckless. Years passed. Pressure eased. Attention faded. The case cooled, which created a dangerous illusion that they had gotten away with it, that the story had worked. That time had erased suspicion. And when people believe they're safe, they relax, they slip, they leave traces. They underestimate technology. They underestimate persistence. The resurfaced Instagram video shattered that illusion, rewrote the timeline, exposed inconsistencies, reactivated investigators, reignited scrutiny. 7 years later, pressure returned. Stronger, focused, relentless. Search warrants followed. Forensic teams arrived, and everything they had buried, literally and metaphorically, began to surface. Pressure had finally reached critical mass, and under that weight, the truth could no longer remain hidden. But pressure doesn't just reveal facts. It reveals character. It shows who confesses, who blames, who deflects, who manipulates. And in the next act, we will see exactly how trust collapsed, how alliances shifted, and how, when survival becomes the only goal, loyalty becomes expendable. Every secret shared by more than one person eventually becomes a liability. Because secrets require cooperation. They require consistency. They require loyalty. And loyalty weakens under fear. By the time investigators returned to that quiet house in Porterdale in 2023, the fracture had already begun years earlier. It had just taken time to surface. For 7 years, Jonathan and Caitlin had lived inside a lie. Not one dramatic lie, a layered one, a story built from half-truths, omissions, and rehearsed explanations. Every conversation about that night required calculation. Every memory had to be edited. Every question had to be anticipated. That is exhausting, and exhaustion breaks people. At first, they were aligned. Same story, same tone, same details, a united front. But unity born from fear is fragile. It lasts only as long as everyone believes silence is safer than truth. Over time, cracks formed, not publicly, privately, in arguments, in resentment, in subtle blame. Who made this decision? Who suggested that? Who went too far? Who panicked first? Those questions never disappear. They circle endlessly. Inside their relationship, power shifted. At times, Jonathan dominated. At times, Caitlin resisted. At times, she complied. Control became a currency. Who held it depended on circumstance. And control always seeks preservation. Psychologically, both were deteriorating. Jonathan grew more paranoid. Friends noticed mood changes, isolation, distrust. He became guarded, careful about what he said, careful about who he spoke to. Classic signs of someone managing a secret. Caitlin's behavior became more erratic. Her online presence grew darker, more provocative, more disturbing. Posts referencing death, violence, morbid fascination. Some saw it as attention-seeking. Others saw it as expression. In retrospect, it looked like leakage. When people cannot speak openly, their minds find other outlets. They were no longer just hiding from police. They were hiding from each other, wondering, if I get arrested, will they blame me? If I talk, will they betray me? If I stay silent, will they sacrifice me? That uncertainty corrodes trust. When the resurfaced Instagram video emerged, everything changed. The timeline shifted. Their story collapsed. And suddenly, investigators had leverage. Real leverage. Search warrants followed. Public attention returned. News cameras arrived. Neighbors whispered. Employers noticed. Their past was no longer buried. It was headline material. Jonathan was living in Los Angeles by then. Far away. Different life. Different identity. But distance did not protect him. Extradition exists. Digital trails exist. Memory exists. Caitlin was arrested first. Questioned. Isolated. Confronted with evidence. And isolation is where fractures widen. Without Jonathan beside her. Without rehearsed coordination. Without mutual reinforcement. She was alone. Under interrogation, she shifted. She admitted being present. but denied responsibility. She claimed she walked into a room and found a body. Cold, not breathing. She framed herself as shocked, horrified, helpless. A witness, not a participant. That statement was not random. It was strategic. It placed distance between her and the act. It positioned her as secondary. It suggested innocence through ignorance. Jonathan responded differently. He blamed. He accused. He portrayed Caitlin as obsessed, as fascinated with death, as wanting to kill, as wanting to experiment, as the instigator. Two people, one crime, two narratives, and they could not both be true. This is where fractures become visible. When survival instincts override partnership. When self-preservation replaces loyalty. When the goal becomes, save myself. Prosecutors noticed the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the evolving statements. They compared timelines, cross-referenced phone data, analyzed behavior, and they saw what had happened. A slow unraveling. Jonathan began cooperating, providing details, offering testimony, positioning himself as less culpable. A classic move. If I help you, you help me. Caitlin's defense shifted, questioned evidence, challenged credibility, disputed claims. She maintained she had not killed anyone, that she had discovered something horrible and been trapped. Neither admitted full responsibility. Both implied the other was worse, which is revealing, because innocent people don't negotiate blame. They deny involvement entirely. Their relationship collapsed completely. No more unity, no more protection, just mutual suspicion, each aware the other could end their life as they knew it. Meanwhile, investigators reconstructed the past, piece by piece. Phone pings, social media, witness statements, physical evidence. They mapped movements, timelines, locations, and slowly a picture emerged, one that did not match either story fully. Something had happened inside that house, not accidentally, not suddenly, something involving conflict, control, fear, and irreversible violence. Forensic evidence suggested concealment, effort, planning, not panic, which contradicted claims of shock, burned remains, dismemberment, disposal. These are not impulsive acts. They are deliberate. They require time. They require cooperation. They require psychological detachment. And that is where the fracture became undeniable. Because those actions cannot be performed by one person alone easily. They require assistance, silence, participation. The idea that one person acted and the other merely watched became less plausible. The narrative of ignorance collapsed. As court proceedings advanced, more disturbing details surfaced. Statements, confessions, allegations, including necrophilia, cannibalism claims, unverified but horrifying. Whether true or exaggerated, they reveal mindset, a willingness to cross moral boundaries, a detachment from humanity. Those claims also served a purpose, to shift blame, to paint the other as monstrous, to look less monstrous by comparison. By this stage, the fracture was complete. They were no longer partners. They were adversaries, each hoping the system would believe their version, each terrified of the other's testimony. 7 years of silence ended in mutual destruction. Not closure, not justice, just exposure. And yet, even with arrests, the truth was still fragmented, still incomplete, still filtered through self-interest, still distorted by fear. Because when people commit crimes together, they rarely agree on what happened. They agree only on one thing, not to tell the whole story. In the next act, that final barrier will collapse. When choices become irreversible, when deals are made, when responsibility is finally claimed, partially, strategically, reluctantly, and when the point of no return is crossed, not by violence, but by confession. Every true crime story has a moment when escape becomes impossible. Not when a crime happens, when the truth begins to surface, when evidence aligns, when lies stop working, when the future narrows to a single corridor. For Jonathan and Caitlin, that moment did not arrive in 2016. It arrived 7 years later. Inside interrogation rooms, court filings, plea negotiations, and whispered conversations between attorneys and prosecutors. By 2023, the investigation had reached a critical stage. Search warrants had produced human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed identity. Public attention had returned, and the case was no longer about missing. It was about murder, which changed everything. Murder carries weight. Legally, socially, psychologically. It removes ambiguity. It replaces maybe with someone is responsible, and someone had to be held accountable. For Jonathan, the walls were closing in. Physical evidence, digital records, witness accounts, all pointed toward his involvement. He could see the trajectory. Trial, exposure, life sentence, possibly death penalty consideration. No control, no narrative, no escape. He had always believed he was smarter, more careful, more strategic. That belief had protected him for years. Now it was collapsing. Prosecutors had leverage, and they used it. They offered something criminals understand immediately. Certainty, a plea, confess, accept responsibility, avoid trial, control the outcome, or risk everything. Jonathan chose control, not innocence, not vindication, control. He entered a non-negotiated plea, admitting guilt, accepting charges, relinquishing the right to fight, because fighting would mean details, witnesses, evidence, public exposure. Every secret lay bare. The plea was his way of limiting damage to himself, to his family, to what remained of his identity. In court, prosecutors described what they believed happened: strangulation, dismemberment, burning, concealment. Not a single impulsive act. A sequence, a process, a series of decisions, each one crossing another moral boundary. They alleged sexual abuse of remains, extended manipulation, behavior that suggested not panic, but possession, control, dominance. Whether every allegation was fully verifiable mattered less than the pattern. A pattern of extreme dehumanization, of treating a person as an object, of erasing individuality. Jonathan did not contest it publicly. He did not narrate his own version. He accepted, which in the justice system speaks volumes. But acceptance is not the same as truth. It is often a calculation, a choice between bad outcomes. Caitlin watched this unfold from a different position. She had not pleaded. Her case was still pending. Her fate undecided. Her strategy uncertain. Jonathan's plea changed her situation. Suddenly, her former partner was cooperating. Suddenly, he could testify. Suddenly, he had incentive to portray her negatively. She was now isolated. No shared defense. No coordinati narrative. No mutual protection. Just her word. Against his. Against evidence. Against prosecutors. Her legal team faced a dilemma. Fight or negotiate. But fighting meant risking everything. And negotiations meant admitting something. Meanwhile, public perception shifted. Jonathan was now officially guilty. A convicted murderer, which reframed everything. The question was no longer, did something happen? It was, how much did she know? Prosecutors prepared their case. Social media posts, videos, writings, notes, messages, anything that could show mindset, intent, fascination, premeditation. They sought to introduce evidence of her interest in death. Serial killers, occult symbolism, violence, not as proof of action, but of inclination. The judge had not yet ruled, but the possibility loomed. If admitted, it would reshape the trial. It would paint a psychological portrait, one difficult to overcome. For Caitlin, this was the point of no return. Every path forward was catastrophic. Conviction, life sentence, public vilification. or plea, admission, permanent identity as accomplice to murder. Jonathan's sentence came down. Life without parole, no future, no release, no redemption through time. Juste permanent confinement. That sentence was symbolic. It told Caitlin, this is real. This is permanent. This is not going away. For the family, it was complicated. There was relief, but not peace. Answers, but not comfort. Justice, but not restoration. Her mother listened as details were read aloud. Details no parent should ever hear. What happened? How it happened? What was done afterward? Every sentence reopening wounds. And yet, even now, some questions remained unanswered. Why that night? Why her? What triggered it? Who initiated? Who resisted? Who escalated? The plea did not explain motive. It only acknowledged outcome. Jonathan's cooperation suggested he would testify, that he would speak, that he would point, that he would explain. But explanations from convicted criminals are never neutral. They're shaped by survival, by regret, by strategy, by resentment. Caitlin now had to prepare for a future defined by someone else's narrative, someone who had every reason to minimize his role and maximize hers. The irreversible decisions were made. Jonathan chose confession. Caitlin chose resistance. The state chose prosecution, and the story entered its final phase. No more hiding, no more delays, no more ambiguity. Everything from here forward would be permanent, recorded, archived, remembered. And yet, even at this stage, the truth was still fragmented, still filtered, still incomplete. Because some secrets die with their keepers, and some motives never surface. In the next act, control will finally collapse. Testimonies, legal battles, public scrutiny, and the slow, painful unraveling of every illusion they maintained for 7 years. This is where plans fail, where narratives break, where reality asserts itself, and where the cost of every earlier decision finally comes due. When control disappears, everything becomes visible. The carefully constructed stories, the selective memories, the practiced denials, the emotional armor, all of it collapses, and what remains is exposure. By the time Jonathan was sentenced to life without parole, the illusion that this case could ever be managed was gone. There was no longer a version of events he could curate, no narrative he could adjust, no future he could negotiate. His story was now fixed inside court records. Permanent. For Caitlin, that moment marked the beginning of her fall, not because she was immediately convicted, because she lost uncertainty. Before anything was possible, acquittal, dismissal, mistrial, delay. After Jonathan's plea, possibilities narrowed. Public opinion hardened. Prosecutors intensified. Evidence gained context. She was no longer a person of interest. She was the other defendant. The media reframed everything. Headlines shifted. From missing woman case reopened to cold case murder conspiracy. Every article repeated the same names. Every broadcast replayed the same images. Her face, his mugshot, the victim's photo, a permanent association. Neighbors, co-workers, former friends, all learned at once who she was, what she was accused of, what she might have known. Social consequences arrived before legal ones. People stopped answering calls, stopped responding to messages, stopped defending her. Isolation followed. Investigators continued digging, even after Jonathan's conviction, because one conviction does not equal full truth. They examined financial records, old messages, deleted files, archive posts, anything that could reconstruct mindset. They interviewed acquaintances, people from a club, former roommates, friends. Small details emerged. Comments she had made, jokes, references, nothing definitive, but patterns, themes, dark humor, morbid curiosity, fascination with crime, not proof. Context. Prosecutors built a narrative. not just events, of psychology. Two unstable individuals, reinforcing each other, escalating fantasies, removing moral breaks, until reality was no longer distinguishable from imagination. Defense attorneys countered, argued coercion, fear, manipulation, portrayed her as subordinate, controlled, intimidated, suggested she had been trapped, emotionally, psychologically, physically, which raised another uncomfortable question. If she was afraid, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she report? Why didn't she run? There are answers to those questions. Trauma, dependency, fear. But courts demand evidence, not theories. Meanwhile, the property where remains were found became symbolic. A quiet place, now infamous. A location tied forever to violence. New owners had to live with that knowledge. A reminder that evil often hides in ordinary places. Her mother returned to that area repeatedly, not because she wanted to, because she needed to understand, to process, to connect physical space to loss. She said it helped. It also hurt. Vigils continued. Candles, photos, prayers. Community members joined. Strangers who had never met her, but felt invested. Because unresolved violence unsettles everyone. Jonathan remained silent after sentencing. No public apology. No detal confession. No closure. Just incarceration. A life measured in routines and restrictions. Inside prison, he would live among others who had also crossed irreversible lines. Men who once believed they were in control and learned they weren't. Caitlin awaited trial. Years after the crime. Months after arrest. Living in limbo. Every day uncertain. Every night restless. Every decision overshadowed by possibility of life imprisonment. The legal process dragged. Motions, hearings, delays, which frustrated the family. But justice systems move slowly, especially in complex cases. Evidence was debated. What could be shown? What should be excluded? What was too prejudicial? The social media videos, the alleged occult interests, the disturbing posts. Would the jury see them? Would they matter? No one knew. Public speculation intensified. Online forums dissected every detail. Body language, courtroom photos, old posts. Everyone became an armchair psychologist. Everyone had a theory. Few had facts. Her mother avoided most of it. She had learned that public opinion is unstable, that strangers' conclusions change nothing, that only legal outcomes mattered. And even those wouldn't bring her daughter back. The fall wasn't dramatic. There were no chase scenes, no last-minute confessions, no cinematic breakdowns, just erosion of reputations, of relationships, of futures. Jonathan's life ended in slow motion. Decades inside concrete walls. No parole, no milestones, just time. Caitlin's identity fractured. Once a dancer, a girlfriend, a co-worker, now a defendant, a suspect, a symbol, her name inseparable from crime. The system moved forward, relentlessly, indifferently, processing human tragedy as paperwork. And in all of this, the victim remained central, not as evidence, as absence. Every hearing reminded everyone. This began with a young woman trying to survive, trying to build something, trying to grow. She had not chosen this outcome. She had not consented. She had not anticipated. Yet her life became defined by other people's decisions. The fall was complete. No one involved emerged untouched. Not the perpetrators, not the families, not the community. But even now, with convictions, with pending trials, with public records, the story was still unfinished. Because punishment does not equal understanding, and justice does not equal meaning. In the final act, we confront what remains. The echoes, the psychological residue, the unanswered questions, and the realization that some tragedies never truly end. They just change form, long after courtrooms empty, long after headlines fade, long after sentences are handed down. What remains is not resolution. It is residue, the emotional, psychological, and social imprint left behind by violence. And in this case, that imprint stretches far beyond a single house in Georgia. It lives in memory, in unanswered questions, in altered lives, in quiet moments when grief resurfaces without warning. For her mother, life never returned to normal, because normal assumes continuity, and her daughter's life ended in fragments. No final gudvie, no last conversation, no closure, just silence, followed by discovery, followed by horror. For 7 years, she had lived in uncertainty, imagining possibilities, clinging to hope, preparing for disappointment. Now, certainty had arrived, and it was worse than any fear she had imagined. People often assume answers bring peace. They don't. They bring specificity to pain. They replace vague anxiety with detailed trauma. They give grief images, and images are harder to escape. She learned details she never wanted to know. What happened? How it happened? What was done afterward? Those facts did not heal. They haunted. She continued to speak publicly, not because she enjoyed it, because she felt responsible. To her daughter, to other families, to vulnerable young people. She wanted the story to matter, to warn, to protect, to prevent repetition. But stories rarely change systems. They change individuals, one at a time. If they listen, friend from her hometown grew older, married, had children, built lives, milestones she never reached. Her social media remained frozen, a digital monument, photos of a teenager who never became an adult. Every birthday became symbolic. Every anniversary reopened wounds. Time moved forward. Grief stayed. Jonathan's existence narrowed to routine. Count, eat, sleep, repeat. Prison is not just confinement. It is erasure. You become a number, a file, a cautionary example. Whether he felt remorse remains unclear. Public records do not capture inner worlds. Some inmates regret. Some rationalize. Some detach. We will never know which he became. Caitlin's case continued. Delays, motions, legal maneuvering. Her future unresolved. Suspended. Living inside uncertainty similar to what the family once endured. An uncomfortable symmetry. If convicted, she will join Jonathan in permanent punishment. If acquitted, she will carry permanent suspicion. Either way, there is no return to anonymity. The community around Porterdale changed subtly. People locked doors more carefully. Parents warned children differently. Trust shifted. Violence reshapes neighborhoods, even when it happens quietly. The property where remains were found became an unspoken landmark. No sign, no marqueur, just knowledge that something unspeakable happened there. New owners live normal lives. Mow lawns, host barbecues, raise families, above buried history. A reminder that the past never fully leaves. Investigators closed the case administratively, filed reports, archived evidence, moved on. They had other cases, other victims, other silences. Justice systems cannot linger. They must continue, but families linger. Always. Psychologists studying violent crime often note something disturbing. The victims fade from public memory faster than perpetrators. Names of criminals are remembered. Faces are repeated. Stories are retold. Victims become symbols, not individuals. In this story, she was more than a case. She was ambitious, stubborn, funny, hopeful, flawed. A teenager who believed she could build a better life and was punished for trying. Her story raises uncomfortable questions, not just about crime, about society, about safety nets, about housing insecurity, about economic vulnerability, about how young people fall through cracks. Would this have happened if she had stable housing? If she had financial support? If she had local opportunities? if she had felt safe asking for help? No one can answer, but those questions matter. It also forces reflection on trust. How quickly we assign it, how casually we accept it, how rarely we verify it, especially when we are tired and afraid. She trusted people because she needed to. They exploited that need, whether intentionally or gradually, whether consciously or subconsciously. The result was the same. Another echo remains in technology. Her phone data, her posts, her video. Digital fragments became her voice after death. Proof she had been alive. Proof she had been there. Proof she had mattered. In modern crime, technology remembers when people cannot. But technology cannot explain motive. It cannot decode psychology. It cannot tell us why some people cross lines others never approach. Jonathan and Caitlin were not monsters in appearance. They were ordinary, which is the most unsettling part. Evil did not arrive roaring. It arrived quietly, through familiarity, through dependence, through routine. And that means it could happen again, in different cities, with different names, under similar conditions, because the pattern is recognizable. Isolation, instability, control, silence. Her mother once said that her daughter had been missing longer than she had lived. That statement reframes everything. 19 years alive, more than 7 years gone. Absence overtaking presence. What remains is not a moral lesson, not a neat conclusion, not closure. It is a warning and a question. A warning that independence without support is dangerous. That desperation attracts predators. That silence is rarely accidental. And a question that lingers. How many people right now are standing where she once stood? Alone, hopeful, unstable, trusting, believing tomorrow will fix everything. Because somewhere, tonight, someone is getting into a car they believe is safe. Someone is accepting help they desperately need. Someone is choosing optimism over caution. Someone is trusting familiarity over instinct. And the most disturbing part of this story is not what happened inside that house. It's how ordinary everything felt before it happened. No alarms, no warnings, no clear turning point, just a series of small decisions, each reasonable, each understandable, each irreversible. So the final question is not, who is responsible? That has been decided. It is, what do we fail to notice? And who will be next? Because if we cannot answer that, then our story is not finished. It is repeating. 7 years. That was how long it took for silence to be explained. Not healed, not justified, explained. For 7 years, a mother woke up every morning wondering if today would be the day her phone rang. For 7 years, a young woman existed only in memory, photos, and unfinished dreams. And even now, with one man sentenced, with another trial pending, with evidence cataloged and archived, the silence has not ended. It has only changed shape. It lives in court transcripts, in evidence lockers, in empty bedrooms, in unanswered questions no verdict can resolve. Somewhere, there's still a version of this story that no one will ever hear. The moment when fear turned into surrender. The second when help was no longer possible. The thought that crossed her mind when she realized she was trapped. That part belongs only to her, and it died with her. What remains is a warning written in absence. That freedom without protection is fragile. That trust without verification is dangerous. That desperation is visible to the wrong people. And that evil rarely announces itself. It waits, disguised as normal, disguised as help, disguised as friendship. Somewhere tonight, someone is packing a bag. Someone is leaving home with hope and very little else. Someone is about to trust the wrong person, and they don't know it yet. That is why this story matters. Not because of how it ended, because of how quietly it began, and how easily it could begin again.